recording. I've got a clean one and I will let them in. So we've got guests. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We've got about 150 people registered. So we'll take a few minutes, let everybody get in, and then we'll start at 11:30. Thank you all for joining us and welcome. We've got quite a large group registered today. They're all coming in through the waiting room. So it's 11:25, but we'll get started right at 11:30. Thanks everyone for joining us. We'll get started here in just a few minutes. We've still got some people coming in through the waiting room. So we'll get started at 11:30. Okay, welcome everyone. I show 11:30, so we're going to go ahead and get started so we can be respectful of your time. Thank you all for joining us this morning. I think this is a great session, and I think you're going to learn a lot. Just in conversing with Mr. Mack, I've learned things that that I wasn't clear on as mandated reporter, and what happens in that process after we make that call. So I've got just a couple housekeeping things for you, and then we'll turn it over to him. My name is Suzanne Jones. I'm the Safe Schools Coordinator for the Division of Elementary and Secondary Education. And I'm hosting several or a lot of these types of trainings because an hour around lunchtime seems to be a good time for a lot of educators to be able to jump on. And so you can watch for more sessions from me in our ESC Works registration system. I will also pop into the chat a link to my trainings page and to my distribution sign-up list, so that if you want to get on a direct mailing list from me, you can. Excuse me if I seem distracted. I'm still trying to admit people as they come in. Certificates for today. You will get a certificate for attending the live session. So if you got the link from anyone other than an email from me or from the ESC Work system, like if someone forwarded it to you, please send me an email. I will put my email address in the chat, and that will let me be able to give you a certificate. If you registered through ESC Works, your certificate will be in ESC Works and you're all good. Also, I know sometimes that y'all may kind of gather up in a room and all watch together, and that is completely fine. If whoever is logged in, whoever's name is on the screen, if you will just take the responsibility to kind of be my co-host and just send me an email with the list of people who are in your room and their email addresses, I'll get them a certificate as well. So just kind of help me make sure we gather up all of our people and all our numbers. If you are a school resource officer or law enforcement and you need CLEST credit for today, send me an email and I will get that approval done and get you on the list for that as well. So look for my email address in the chat to send me those messages. We are recording this session today. Mr. Mack has agreed for that. And so give me about a week to get it turned around and posted on the trainings page. And then this recording will be there for anyone who wants to watch it. There's not professional development for the recording. So any of y'all watching us after the fact, I won't be able to give you a certificate for watching the recording, but you can always look for future live sessions. I tend to repeat as necessary. He will share his PowerPoint with us, so those resources will be up. And also there was a Q&A document that was part of the registration. If you've submitted questions through that Google Doc, we're going to answer them today, and we're going to make sure that that document is added to the website as well. So kind of a list of frequently asked questions around today's session. So thank y'all that added some questions. There's some really thought-provoking ones on there. Again, if you'd like to be on my mailing list, I'll put that link in the chat as well, so you can sign up for that. And also evaluations. I'll put a link in the chat for just a 6-question evaluation that I'd like for you to fill out to help guide not only what kind of trainings we offer, but to give feedback on the ones that we've done in case we need to repeat those sessions. If you need the transcript feature, you should be able to look along the bottom of your screen and you'll see transcript, or it might say CC for closed caption. Feel free to turn that on as you need to, so that you have the accessibility options. And also you'll see the chat feature along the bottom as well. If you have questions today, feel free to pop them in the chat. I'll be monitoring that and giving those questions to Mr. Mack. I'll also watch the Google Doc. If you submit anything through that link while we're talking, we'll make sure we get those questions answered as well. Dan kind of expressed that he really liked that interactive piece of being in the same room so that he could answer your questions. So we want to make this as interactive and as beneficial to you and your specific questions as possible. So I'm here, I'm in the background. If you need me, just email me in the chat, and Mr. Mack, I will turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Suzanne. I appreciate that. As Suzanne mentioned, I'm used to being in a room with you guys there and present and moving around and going up to you and talking to you. So my apologies for this format. If I get away from the camera or you have a problem with audio, just shoot a note to Suzanne in the chat and I'll be sure to sit still in front of the camera for you. Greetings from the Child Abuse Hotline. We are located at the State Police Headquarters in Little Rock. So just a footnote, we do mandated reporter trainings throughout the state. So if you ever have a question, or if you ever have a need to have something done in person, if you're comfortable with that, if you want me to come do a presentation, something similar to this with your staff, please feel free to contact me. Suzanne has my information. At the end of this slide presentation, there's also a slide that'll give you all my contact information. So feel free to contact me anytime you like, and we'll be sure to try and schedule that for you. I'm going to go ahead and share the screen and get the PowerPoint started, and hopefully you can all see this. And we'll go started from there. So the first thing to basically let you know is our phone number. There's also an 844 Save a Child number. Some of these things may be just a little bit redundant, but we try to start out this every session this way. That way everyone has the same information and not going off of anything that may have been old trainings. So we'll get that for you. You can make a report to us either on the phone, call the 800 number, and or you can go ahead and fax in a mandated reporter form to us. Please use the most recent version of the form. Oftentimes, as mandated reporters, we receive the fax form, but it's kind of been doctored. It's not the most current form. Some folks will go into a Word doc, if you will, and they'll create their own type of form, so the information isn't necessarily always obtained. And we have difficulty trying to make a decision on the information and/or corresponding back with the reporter. So our fax number is listed here on the slide. This is right into our office. So there's never an issue of it going somewhere and being lost throughout our building. So if you're using this phone number, then it's coming straight to our office. And I can promise you it stays pretty active. We receive well over 100 faxes a day. It's to the point where we have to designate one specific operator for every shift, for an 8-hour shift throughout the day, just to keep faxes. And even then, we don't have enough time throughout the day for an operator to see a fax.
Mr. Mack,
Yes, ma'am.
they're having a little trouble hearing you. If you don't mind to kind of lean into your camera.
Okay, will do. Thank you for that. So what we have to do is we'll bleed over some of the faxes into our overnight crew. So an operator can probably see anywhere from 25 to 30 faxes a day in their shift. So if we're receiving over 100 faxes, it kind of gets to be excessive for us. So keep them coming in, and we'll go ahead and see them and respond to you timely. For mandated reporting, we want to kind of cover a few things, some common myths that we want to dispel, and make sure that we're all on the same page. So you guys know that you are mandated reporters. You are probably about 70% of the mandated reports that we receive either by fax or on the phone. So you can imagine when we went into the pandemic in March last year that our call volume dropped significantly. We had to go into a reduced staffing situation so we could cover a 24-hour period, and also equally distance and social distance here at the office. We're all in one big area call center. So we modified our schedule according to the call volume. So it definitely went down when you folks were now going virtual. So the virtual tendencies really caused a lot of problems in our dynamics of how we receive the information. As a unit, we still have to obtain the same information from you. So you weren't able to answer those questions for us. So we were kind of just at a stalemate where we know we've got a possible situation. We have red flags. There are things that we definitely want to go ahead and help, especially for your children, because you're seeing them every day, you're hearing from them. But unfortunately, some of the questions that we asked weren't able to be answered. So as yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm going to pause you. Are you able to switch microphones? Do you know how to switch your microphone?
I do not.
Down there where it says mute,
Okay.
do you see your mute button? If you'll click the arrow beside it,
yeah,
you should have an option to use your web camera, or your up at the top it should say select a microphone.
okay.
And if you've got an option, yeah.
All right, I selected the HD webcam.
That's what we need. There we go.
Is that better?
Much better. Thank you.
You're welcome. And as Suzanne will attest, I'm very Zoom illiterate. I can sit in front of the camera and talk, and everything else is pretty much just phantom to me. So I apologize for that. Um, as a mandated reporter, you are legally required to report suspected child abuse or maltreatment. So that's what a lot of these trainings will cover. You don't have to have proof of something going on. You just have to have a suspicion that something is going on or a red flag. You don't have to witness it. You don't have to have firsthand knowledge of it. And we'll talk about how you can basically follow the path, if you will, of where the information original source came from to making a report to the hotline. In non-emergency situations, it's sufficient to use the fax machine. We're fine with that. We realize that you guys have your time is very valuable, and you don't have much time in your day to sit on the phone for 10 to 15 minutes waiting for a call to go through the hotline. So our numbers are surely driven by the number of calls that we receive. We only have 35 operators to really conduct a 24/7 operation 365. So those schedules have to be spread out, and we'll schedule the most operators here when our call volume is the highest. So you guys are there Monday through Friday, 7 till 3:30, 5 o'clock. Our highest call volume starts probably about 8 or 8:30 after your children arrive. And then we stay busy. We have a peak then when they first arrive. We stay busy throughout the day. And then we have a spike towards the end of your day, usually around 1:30, 2 o'clock, as the children are getting ready to go home for the day. So we realize that we have staff coming in and out during those time frames, but just by sheer number, there's just more of you than there are of us to answer the phone and get the call volume down as much as possible. So please use the fax form whenever it's feasible for you in non-emergency type of situations. If you need immediate help, if you've got a situation and it's 2 o'clock, 2:30, and your child is getting ready to go on the school bus, and you're questioning whether or not you want to put them and send them home in a potentially dangerous situation, get with your SRO, call law enforcement. They're the first responders who can act immediately on that. Our operators aren't going to advise you as to whether you should or you shouldn't send them home. That's going to really be up to your discretion. You know your children, you know the situation and the families. So if you need immediate assistance right away, right then and there, get with the law enforcement, and they should be able to direct you. Uh, People say, well, how soon should I know? How soon should I make a report to the hotline? When would I do that? Do I need, how much information do I want to gather, and how much information should I gather? You need to know that to make a report would be immediate. There was a court case that was involved in the judge had determined that immediate was within 48 hours. So gather your information, everything that you would need to, as most of you are familiar with making a report to us, gather your information. And once you've done that, get yourself in a quiet place where you can go ahead and call the hotline or type up a report and fax it into us. There's no need to call us on the way somewhere or on the school somewhere unless there's an immediate situation. Again, and if it's immediate, it really should go to law enforcement. So you have a 48-hour window to get that information to us. Sometimes you may not gather all the true facts. You may have just the tip of the iceberg, and that's okay. Report to us what you have, and then we can ask you questions and make a determination from that as to whether or not we can accept a report for investigation. At the very least, you'll have a documented report in our system as a mandated reporter. If you provide your contact information, including your name, your title, and the school you're calling from, you'll get a referral number. So you'll be able to track that report number and say, I made a report regarding this particular information on this date and time. I spoke with this particular operator, and this is my referral number. So it's always a good point of reference. That will always build our database in case somebody else receives a call from another person in your school or from another area. We'll build that database on that particular individual. So please feel free to call us as soon as you get your information. Years ago, I've been doing this for 22 plus years. there used to be a hierarchy or a chain of command. You could not make a report unless you told your immediate supervisor. This also went true for daycare facilities. Um, that has changed. There's been several laws that have been passed that really prevent mandated reporters from preventing other mandated reporters from making a report. Your legal obligation as a mandated reporter is to make a report if you suspect child abuse or maltreatment to a child. You don't have to get permission from your supervisor or from your superior. You don't have to bounce it off somebody else to see whether they think it's maltreatment or not before you call it in. If you're on the fence about whether or not it should or shouldn't be called in, always err on the side of caution and call it in. Again, at the very least, you've documented your concerns, you've made a report to the hotline, and you'll have a referral number to reference in your file for that particular child should that come about. So please, that's something that the laws have really worked hard to make sure that nobody is preventing you as a mandated reporter from fulfilling your legal obligation. It is your job and it is part of the law that you make a report. What if I'm not certain? What if I don't have proof? What if there's no evidence? I heard this information third or fourth hand. Um, those kind of things are really kind of the norm for us. You're not always going to have a firsthand or an eyewitness account of the situation. You yourself, as a reporter, you're going to get information told to you. Our job as an operator and the hotline is to really kind of go back to the point of origin. Where did this original information come from? If the victim child told their best friend in school, and the best friend in school told their school teacher, and their school teacher told the school counselor, and the school counselor is making the report, as long as the counselor believes this is factual information and there's no reason for this child to be making up a story, that's a firsthand account. The original source was the victim child. If someone was an eyewitness to an incident and they went ahead and made information known to someone else, and again there was a third, fourth, fifth hand passing along, you still have an eyewitness to the account. So you don't necessarily have to necessarily have the evidence, the proof, or the eyewitness of it to make the report to us. We're very hesitant to take something on the rumor mill. Rumor has it, or scuttlebutt around town says, I heard this was going on with so and so. We really want to have some source of legitimacy, if you will, to the allegations where everyone else around town knows this is going on. It's been going on for years and no one's going to stop it. We really need an account of specifically what has happened, when did it happen, where did it occur, how or who did it occur to, and then how do they know the information? It's not so much of, well, I heard it through the grapevine. We try to get away from the grapevine mentality and try to get that firsthand account, because the investigators, whether they be with Department of Children and Family Services or the Crimes Against Children Division with state police, have to go to that source. If they go to the child and the child denies it, then they have no one to go back to that says, well, you saw this, or you witnessed this, or you were told this information by someone specifically. As a profession, whatever profession you put there, in this case, as an educator, I can use my judgment to determine if it's best interest of the child for me to make a call. Sometimes that's not always going to be the case, but if it's harmful to the child, then that's something that needs to be made. There's often times where children are either physically abused, emotionally abused, or sexually abused, where they just want the abuse to stop, and they just want to go away, or they just want to forget about it. But again, as a legal obligation, as a mandated reporter, you don't get to make that call. That judgment's been kind of removed from you. You have to make that call. Whether or not the family or the child wants to participate in that investigation or follow up with that, that's really up to them. If they say, I don't want to talk about it, it's a done deal, it's over with, and leave it at that, that is their choice. But at least you've made the report to the hotline and fulfilled your legal obligation. Everyone wants to say that HIPAA would prevent you from making a report to the hotline. The child maltreatment laws actually supersede some of that information. So we are able to receive information from the medical staff, from things that may have been spoken in confidence. So those are ways we can get our information without that. If there's ever a question about what can be released to the hotline, I encourage you to contact your legal advocate in your agency, whether it be a superintendent or someone who would have the legal knowledge of what you can and cannot release to for child maltreatment issues. Because again, those are things that we would definitely want to know and be aware of. As educators, we receive a lot of reports from you in regarding educational neglect. And any of you that have been around for a number of years have seen the requirements to make an educational neglect report change drastically. Believe me, that is not the desire of the hotline. We have to adapt and overcome every single legislative session whenever there's a change to the Child Maltreatment Act. So in 2019, legislation passed for Act 554 of what requirements were needed to register a report or accept a report for educational neglect to a child. What was happening was DCFS was going out on these reports that were made by just anonymous people in the neighborhood, someone who may have seen a child out and about in the neighborhood and assumed they weren't going to school, and they were making a report to the hotline. So legislation was passed to make it to where more educators were the ones making the report, because they would have all these bullet points checked when they made a report to the hotline. So the first and foremost would be that, is this child enrolled in school at all? If they're enrolled in school, they've met their legal obligation to fulfill to go to school. I know now with the virtual attendance and everything else, they may be enrolled, but they're not submitting their work from a virtual standpoint. So the first aspect of it is whether or not we're going to ask you if the child is enrolled in school. If they are enrolled in school, then you would come down to this or category. And all four bullet points under the or have to be met for a report to be accepted by the hotline. The parent or guardian is causing the child to be absent from school. If they're a little guy in early elementary, they obviously can't get themselves to school, then you could say the parent is not driving them, not bringing them in, whether it be due to substance influences or just not getting up to take them to school or bring them to school. The absences were not caused by the child refusing to attend school. That becomes a truancy issue, particularly when you're considering older children. If they leave the house to say that if they're going to school and they never show up, parents are assuming that they're going. The third aspect that would need to be met is that the absences are habitual and without justification. Um, COVID was deemed to be a justifiable reason to keep children from school. So um, those who opted for virtual attendance um, did just that, and there was a problem with logging in with the attendance, with submitting paperwork or submitting assignments. Unfortunately, as you see in this act on the slide, there is nothing that says, well, in the cases of virtual learning, we're going to do this. So cyber learning really wasn't thought of in Act 554. You may have had the occasional day off because of a weather issue or weather event. And even this past February, where we were closed for a week of school or a week of just shut down everything, there was still always a chance that you would come back to school the next week. But when you were down for 2.5 months of last year and then a majority of it this year, that still didn't come back into play for legislation. So hopefully legislation will be written somewhere in the future. Should there be a virtual need for students to attend, there'll be some guidelines that you as educators can kind of follow, and that the parents can follow to make sure that their child is being educated. And then the last bullet, ma'am.
We've got a question in the chat. How many absences does it take to make the call? Like, is there a magic number, or how do you judge absences numbers?
And that's a hard part of it. Years ago, there used to be, it was up to the school and their attendance records. So if the school said 10 was the number and they exceeded that, that was okay. but they went away specifically from a number because they wanted the 4 bullet points to be met. If these absences, and they could just be a couple of them, but if you have a child who is missing school and their grades are being negatively impacted by their lack of attendance, that meets it. So believe me, we've argued and have been kind of beat up, if you will, from both sides of this argument. The educators who are trying to register the report, and then the DCFS folks who've accepted it and said, okay, well, we have to investigate, but the child has yet to have missed the number of days the school allows them to miss. So we're kind of in between. So we're going by the black and white of what's on the screen. And if the school says that yes, these are negatively impacting that child's performance, then they've met their due diligence for us to accept a report. The number of days really doesn't come into play, but we do want, and again, the absences are habitual, they're without justification. So those are all 4 of those points need to be met. So hopefully the number of days doesn't come into play. And what we've seen, especially this week and last week, are we've got several kids who are missing plenty of days, weeks, 2 and 3 weeks of days that they've missed from just one semester. So it usually doesn't come into just a few days, but we do want to make sure that the absences are negatively impacting the child's school performance.
And then one more question.
Mhm.
And I'm going to preface this by saying, after this discussion and in planning for today, Mr. Mack shared that there's a big need for a session just on educational neglect. So we have actually set up a second session with Mr. Mack for May 18th at 1 o'clock. It is in ESC Works, and I'll get information out. If you're on my mailing list, you'll get an email about it shortly. But we're setting up a complete 1-hour conversation about educational neglect because there's so many pieces to it if you want to come back to that. But Dan, the question is, what all should be included in the report if we report educational neglect based on absences?
Really, these 4 bullet points. We have to know, and the problem with virtual learning is that the majority of the time, you don't know why the child is not turning in attendance. You don't know why they're not logging in. You've made electronic communications to the parent or guardian and they're not responding. They're not answering their cell phone. So that question remains unanswered. So you've done everything that you possibly can, but you're not getting a report. And that's part of our stalemate, if you will. We need these questions answered, but you can't get them because it's not for lack of trying. So we understand that everyone's trying. So answer the 4 bullet points to the best of your ability and then send it in to us.
And one more, you've hit the sweet spot with all these questions. If a FINS has been filed, the family has a FINS officer, and the child continues to be truant, is there any other obligation that we need to fulfill? And they go on to say that this is actually in reference to a SPED case with IEPs and who's not meeting their federal hours.
Yeah, when they do the truancy part of it, that really takes the educational neglect aspect away from us. So if there's a FINS case involved, which happens a lot because the kids are missing, but the children are just skipping school, that takes it from a maltreatment issue, and now it becomes a legal issue with truancy and FINS, and that's the best route. Unfortunately, it's not a very quick, response to fix your need of what you've got. That's the only problem there. Be careful of leading questions to your child, to the situation at hand, so that it doesn't taint the investigation. You want to get the whatever information you can possibly get, call the hotline, and you've made your report, and that should be just enough. You don't want to sit a child down with an interview and an interrogation and everything, because again, that taints some things. These children are going to be interviewed by a family service worker with DCFS or a forensic interviewer, possibly with CACD. So let them run their course, and you just make the report to us. As a follow-up, once you've made a report to the hotline, you will be told yes or no, this is accepted for investigation or it's not. You should be told the allegation that's going to be accepted, which agency is going to be conducting the investigation. You have met your legal obligation at that time. The investigative agency is under no legal obligation to keep you updated or in the loop, if you will, as to the outcome of your investigation or to the progress of your investigation. So once you've made your report, let the investigation run its course. Legally, there's been a timestamp of 45 days for that investigation to be completed. Quite often they're completed in much less than that time, at least 2 weeks less than that, depending on the how all of it runs down and being able to contact the family and the child and everything. It may take the full 45 days. So try to go ahead and be patient with that situation. If you forgot something, or you need to you've got some more additional information, unless it's a brand new report or allegation on that same victim child, provide that information to the caseworker or to the investigator. They'll need that. We don't have a way to really add on to an additional or add on to a previous report. So we won't do that part of it for you. But if you've got new allegations, then by all means, we can go ahead and accept a new report for you. As the investigative procedures, there are two priorities that are assigned to an allegation or a maltreatment investigation. The priority one report is something that would be initiated within 24 hours or sooner, depending on the safety issue. If it's an allegation of sexual abuse and the alleged offender lives in the home with the victim child, that would be something that would be an immediate response. So as soon as it's made to us, we'll forward it on to the investigative agency electronically. They'll have 24 hours to make a face-to-face contact with the victim child. Oftentimes that's done at school so they can see the child before they go home to the situation. If there isn't a contact between the two, the victim and the offender, then they may not necessarily make that contact at school as necessary. So the allegation will really determine what priority response will be given to us. Generally, as educators, you don't respond or you don't really report a lot of priority one allegations. A mental injury or a mental trauma to a child is a priority one allegation, and that usually deals with a child who has suicidal or homicidal ideations and has previously attempted suicide. So that would elevate to a priority one. But most reports that are provided by educators will fall under a priority two response time, where they're more neglectful allegations, or a child may have received a bruise from a disciplinary action. And again, unless it's an immediate harm to the child or immediate risk or safety issue to the child, it would be assigned a priority two response. The investigator will contact the reporter during the course of the investigation, but there is no time window for that. So I know that you're dealing with wanting to know what's happened and you're concerned for the child and for the family, but you may not be contacted necessarily the day of the situation. The first and foremost responsibility for the investigator is to ensure the safety of that child. So they're going to focus on that aspect of it first, and then eventually, I promise you, they will get to you as a mandated reporter to get your side of the story, to say, okay, here's what you reported. Let's go ahead and see if there's anything else that you may have or may have learned after the fact, and how did you get your information and so on. So just be patient and try to wait for them to contact you. Investigative powers, most of you are very familiar with this type of a situation, but investigators can come into your school, to your facility, and get quite a bit of information from you, contact the child, make contact with the child, and that includes without them being, without the child's parent being present. So that is something they can also go ahead and do without concern for you. And then there's information about what school records the investigators can obtain as well. Records that can be provided, again, if they ask you for it, for the most part under these guidelines, they're entitled to it and can get that information from any school without any issues for y'all to be concerned with. And this slide did not complete. Okay. This is actually a contact slide, but for some reason, all you have is our names And that's it. So Suzanne, I'll have to go ahead and update this slide for you, and I'll send you an updated copy of it with all of our contact information. We have just about got enough staffing supervisory wise to have a supervisor physically here in the office. The only time that there's not a supervisor present in the office is usually Friday night from about 9 o'clock to, again, Saturday morning at 8 o'clock. And then again, Saturday night from about 5 o'clock in the evening till 3 o'clock the next Sunday afternoon. Other than that, we will have a supervisor scheduled to be in the office all times throughout the day and night. So if you ever make a report, it's after business hours, you question something, you question the determination of what the operator told you, by all means, you can request to speak with a supervisor. He or she may be at their dinner break or their lunch break, but if you'd like to call back, by all means, provide your name and contact information, and they can go ahead and call you back and get back with you on that. So at the end of your call, you should know the disposition of your report, whether it was accepted or documented, the allegations investigated, and which agency is going to conduct the investigation. Determination-wise, again, depending on the severity of the allegations, your report will be accepted as a priority 1 or a priority 2. If you fax in a report to us, we have 48 hours to reply back to you by fax. Because we receive so many faxes throughout the day, we have to prioritize them. Those faxes that are deemed to be a higher risk or a higher priority based on the allegation type will be keyed first. So as an educator, you may fax in your report at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock in the morning, but if you're reporting educational neglect, it may not be keyed until the overnight hours, because we're keying the higher priority reports first ahead of yours. But you should know something. You should get a return fax reply within 48 hours. If you provide your name and your contact information, your title, the school you work with, and a good phone number and fax number, we can reply back to you. If you just type your title in there, attendance clerk, or you leave the name and field blank at the top of the page, but include your school information, we're going to list it down as anonymous. We can't put down an unknown anonymous person at ABC Middle School. So we have to have the contact information for it to be a valid reporter. As we mentioned, investigations are to be completed within 45 days. I know it's not the easiest thing to just be patient and let the investigator run its course to get back with you, but unfortunately, that's just part of how the system will work, so they can go ahead and give you as good of information as they can. If new maltreatment issues occur, then it's okay to make a new report to the hotline. We can definitely go ahead and take your information, and if there's an existing investigation, the investigative agency will just ask that the 2 reports be merged. So you could make a report today, and before you leave that day, that report could be screened out and associated to a pending investigation. So you would receive a notification on that if that does happen that way.
We've got a couple questions.
Sure.
Is there any way, a bunch more popped in, hold on. Lost my chat there.
Sure.
Is there any way to email in a report?
No. Unfortunately, and we've been looking at this for a number of years. About 12, 15 years ago, when we had a change of administration, we went to Tennessee and we tried to go ahead and see, because they were incorporating online reporting. Everybody had the same things, like, okay, great, this would be a great way for mandated reporters to make a report to the hotline. And then they realized emails were sitting in the queue for up to 2 weeks, because they didn't have the staffing to process all the new reports that came in. You have to have staffing to key all the reports, and then you have to have investigative staffing. And we're just not set up for that. There's just too much of that going on. So unless there's an increase of staffing, both at the hotline and from the investigative standpoint, it's going to be very difficult to do an online reporting system, as much as we would like to, because we know it would definitely be a lot easier for mandated reporters.
And then another one says, who determines if the report is handled by ASP or DHS?
There is actually a working agreement, an MOU, if you will, between the Department of Human Services and the state police. and the investigative administrators. Gary Glisson is the investigative administrator for the Crimes Against Children Division. He used to be the administrator here at the Hotline a couple of years ago, so a lot of you may remember Gary. And then Misha Martin is the DCFS counterpart over Children and Family Services. So we get together, they get together to determine which agency is going to investigate which allegation types. The law will determine which allegations have the higher priority. So we already have that information in front of us. It's not necessarily known to the general public, but when it comes in, we know that this particular allegation is going to be assigned to this agency based on this criteria. So we'll know that.
And then another one, when we place the report, will our names be kept confidential, or are reporter names given out to parents?
Yes, from the confidentiality, no to giving out to the parents. Again, years ago, there were some really just bad practices, if you will, from investigative standpoints. So from a hotline standpoint, we will tell the reporter, your information is by law to be kept confidential. So you can leave your name. We encourage folks to leave your name. By law, the investigative.
For 1 second, because I did it this week and I had a parent in my office within 2 days yelling at me because my name was given out to them that I'm the one who turned it in.
Okay. So based on that, you're not the first person that has said that. I can tell you from a hotline operation, we don't make contact with anyone. We'll go ahead and if it's accepted, we'll assign it electronically to the investigative agency. The investigative agency doesn't give the family, isn't supposed to give the family a copy of the report. They're only just supposed to say that there's a report that's been made of and this is the allegation. So, yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I used to work as an investigator, a child abuse investigator. And so what happens is a lot of the times once you read the report, the family automatically knows just kind of from putting the pieces of the puzzle together who probably sent the report out. And they try to make people think that they know just to see if you're going to say that you made the report or not. A lot of the times, and that's just from on the other side of it.
I know, but I mean,
do that.
I've had it happen several times where, I mean, it's very specific that for my first and last name, so I know that they're giving it to them.
Yeah, I know I worked for Pulaski County and we were trained to always, because it's a report that's printed out and there's like the last sheet of it has the reporting information. And so we were trained to always throw that sheet away, like always put that sheet to the side. But I don't know, a lot of times the families, they figure it out and that's the first thing that they want to know. Well, who reported it? They don't care what the report says, but they want to know exactly who reported it. And because I know by law, like we couldn't tell them because they could retaliate. But
right, yeah, if that's a continual habitual problem for you, Courtney, I would definitely speak with your DCFS supervisor in your area. If you need that information, we can always, that's always a table that's out there for public knowledge. Just say, hey, I made this report. This is what the family told me, and within a matter of hours, I was contacted that they were given my name. Chances are, like Genesis said, it's not so much that they're giving the information, but the family is saying, "Oh, I know it was that so and so at that school," and they're always doing. So again, we hear that a lot legally again, but your information is to be kept confidential. They're not supposed to give any of your reporter information out whatsoever. If possible, try to familiarize yourself with your DCFS investigators and their CACD counterparts. Sometimes just having a good, friendly working relationship with those folks may give you some information, or at least give you an avenue to say, hey, they gave her my name and number. What can we do about that kind of information? And at least it'll give you some kind of peace of mind to know what was done, what wasn't done. But we do hear that a lot as far as people, they don't even know who their local investigators are. So if you can familiarize yourself with some of the folks in your county offices, by all means, I strongly encourage that for you to do that.
And we do still have some other questions
Sure.
kind of on various topics, but this one, you said something about administrative hearings, and they ask, what do you mean by administrative hearings when you stated that leading questions could affect the outcome of the administrative hearings?
Well, and it really becomes, if something is goes to appeal, and that's a little bit outside my realm of expertise. But we don't want the initial information obtained to really conflict with what happens in a forensic interview. So sometimes people will take it upon themselves to conduct their own investigation before contacting the hotline, and they really are just not doing themselves a really good justice in that. Obtain the mental information that you know will be accepted for a report or needed for a report, and then just make the hotline call.
And what type of reply should be received within 24 hours when a fax is sent? A confirmation that the fax was received, or?
Let's see if I can. Actually, it'll be a fax form from us, and it'll have our state police logo at the top, and there'll be a list of bullet points of why your report was not accepted for investigation. It'll be addressed to the name of the school, to the name of the sender who made the report. Will probably, if you're at a school, we're not going to put down the family name on the fax, but we will put down the initials, first and last initial of the child that's being reported. We'll tell you what referral number it is, and then we'll give you the disposition. It was accepted for investigation and assigned to checkbox DCFS, checkbox CACD. If it was not accepted, we'll check a box that says was not accepted for investigation because it didn't meet criteria to accept for investigation, or the incident occurred out of state. The alleged offender was not a caregiver of the child at the time of the incident, or so on. So you should know and get that information that fax back to you within the 48 hours if we have a valid fax number for you.
And then if a reporter goes to the SRO, will the reporter remain anonymous?
So if the reporter has made the call to the hotline, made the report to the hotline, is that what that refers to?
Terry, do you want to unmute and clarify?
Like if you go to the SRO because it's at the end of the day or for whatever reason, so then I'm assuming it becomes a police report at that point, because in this case, I'm thinking of the parent was arrested. And so is the reporter's name on that? Like, because they got the information from a teacher or a counselor?
Not for our report. For our report, we would list somebody, Terry, you would be the reporter, and we would ask you, does anyone else know about the situation? And you'd say, yes. So we told our SRO, then we put the SRO's title and name in there as far as an additional person knowing about it. What would be included in the police report would be really up to the SRO. If they're going to pursue a criminal aspect on it, then they may just put in there people who were involved with it. But once it becomes public knowledge, especially with police reports, more than likely the family is going to assume the police officer is the one who made the report to the hotline. They may not even know about the report that you made to the hotline before the fact.
Okay, I was really
police involvement, that really kind of opens up, says, okay, police was involved. They know they're mandated to go ahead and call the hotline.
okay.
Okay.
Suzanne, I have a question. I'm Rodney Ford. I'm with school counseling here at DESE. And we've had this question before with our school counselors. If they tell the school resource officer about an allegation, do they still need to call the hotline?
If they're a mandated reporter, I would.
Okay, that's what we've been telling them. So
right. It's very common for us to get 4 and 5 reports on the exact same victim, family, incident, and so on. Unless they're all in the same room together, then I would definitely make each individual report that way. Because what happens is that Rodney may say, well, I was in a room with Terry and with Genesis and with Courtney, and one of them is going to make the report. And everybody else thinks the same thing, and then nobody makes a report. So those are situations we'd rather have 5 reports than no reports. Okay.
And are you kind of at the Q&A? Our chat is filling up with questions.
I'm there. I'm
okay.
ready for you.
All right. So can you talk a little bit about what qualifies as emotional abuse and what to put, say, on to the operator when we report it?
Sure. So sometimes what parents say to their children is horrific, and you can't believe you're actually hearing that. So That's part of it. What we want to know also is how is it affecting the child? What is their demeanor like? School counselors are usually great for this type of information. The child's coming to them, maybe they're emotionally distraught, they're at wit's end, they're talking, they're having suicidal or homicidal ideations. And we want to find out, well, why, what's causing this distress to them. If it's at the hands of a parent or guardian, someone who has care for them, and they're verbally abusing them, calling them names, making fun of them, and so on, that qualifies as mental injury. That's what we're looking for. Situations that are really not under the control of a parent or guardian. Maybe they're going through a traumatic breakup. Maybe the family's getting divorced. The child has lost his or her significant other, or they have a breakup with a boyfriend or girlfriend. Those aren't the same thing. So we're looking at situations of caregivers, parents who are causing distress and trauma to the child that's leading them to wanting to end their life, or their distress and what's causing it.
Can you clarify, are fax reports only for non-emergency reporting? And what constitutes a non-emergency? The form states non-emergency use only.
Right. That's how it was developed. If you have a situation and you know of a child being sexually abused by her in-home stepdad, don't fax that in, because you know that child's going to leave your school and they're going to go home to that situation. So depending on the safety factor or issue that you're reporting, that would really depend on whether or not you want to fax it in or call it in. Faxing in things like educational neglect, minor neglect issues as far as a child not having adequate clothing. If they're in need of medical attention, but it's not necessarily immediate where they need to be taken to the doctor right then and there. So some of your minor neglect cases, information that you don't believe will be accepted for investigation anyway, but you want to make a report for documentation purposes, that's permissible. But that being said, we still receive daily reports of priority one allegations.
Is it possible for the hotline to accept a report from a mandated reporter without giving a name? I was told teachers cannot call anonymously.
False. You can remain anonymous as a mandated reporter. Everybody has that legal right, even if you are a mandated reporter. But don't preface it and start out by saying, I'm a mandated reporter, but I want to remain anonymous. Don't give out your school information or all your contact information. I want to report this as a mandated reporter, but I don't want my name given to the family. It's either or. So that's kind of one of those things that we try to let the reporter make the decision. If you choose to remain anonymous, that's fine. We'll go on and take the rest of the report. As investigators have told me, they prefer the information be provided by the reporter, because that gives them somebody to talk to and justify or at least clarify some of the information in the report. But certainly as a mandated reporter, I understand why you couldn't or you wouldn't provide your information.
Emotional neglect seems to be difficult to get accepted for investigation. Is there something specific that needs to be included to have an emotional neglect be taken seriously? And you may have already covered some of that.
Right, and a lot of it will depend on the distress and the emotional stability of the child. What's going on in his or her life that's causing the distress. Again, we're looking at signs of suicidal or homicidal ideation. They become withdrawn. They become a discussion of wanting to run away, to live somewhere other than with their family, be put in foster care. They can't take it anymore. They're emotionally distressed by the situation, and the parent or guardian is causing that distress by verbally abusing them, by constantly putting them down, causing anguish, those kind of things, which are what we're looking for.
And this kind of seems to speak to that relationship with an SRO, if you've got it, or law enforcement in the community. They said they called in a report, and the person taking my name at the hotline, I asked what to do because I was scared for the child. They advised me to contact my SRO, and the SRO stepped in and was able to help. So if you've got that immediate issue of a child going home to a severe situation, that's when you would bring in law enforcement or your SRO.
Right. Whenever the child safety comes into play, immediately get with law enforcement or somebody within your agency or your facility. Say, hey, what do we do in situations like this? The child's about to go on the bus in an hour, and there's really concern for the child's safety. Law enforcement would be our best bet to say contact them, because again, we can't get anyone out there any quicker than either your SRO on campus or law enforcement within your area.
What are the guidelines for a principal or counselor being with a young child during a DHS interview? Is this never allowed?
That would be more or less up to the investigator. Depends on if for me and what I would understand, more than likely they wouldn't want anyone else present unless maybe there was a language barrier, or if maybe the child felt comfortable with that individual being there. But certainly the investigator would have the right to say, I need, ask the person or individual to leave.
I faxed in a sexual abuse report and it was denied. It said it did not meet the criteria. The SRO called our local sheriff's office and the offender was arrested 3 hours later. Is calling more effective?
Calling is always more effective particularly for sexual abuse. The sexual abuse dynamics are they're very stringent, and they're really, we have a lot of questions to ask. And frankly, typical faxes just don't give us enough information. General terms like sexually assaulted, sexually molested, inappropriately touched, or made me feel uncomfortable, those terms just don't give us the specifics of exactly where the child was touched, in what manner, what was the context of the alleged touching, and so on. So I would encourage almost every time that if you're saying that the child was, you're reporting sexual abuse, pick up the phone and make the call. Now, if you have a teenager who is saying that they went to a party last weekend and they were alleging they were raped, then we'll take that term with the understanding that the child understands the term rape. But we would still, if you called in, we would still ask you, do you believe the child understands the term rape? And do they mean unwanted sexual contact? So if you do report sexual abuse in a fax, just be very specific as far as what happened to the child. And yes, they understand the meaning of unwanted sexual contact and where it may have occurred.
Is there a written rubric that is followed which we could use for reference?
Not really, because we don't use a script at the hotline. We just kind of know of things that we look for. If you're mentioning or considering a specific allegation type, I could probably give you different terminology of what we're looking for if there's an allegation that you're looking for.
We were trained before by DHS Hotline not to investigate. We report what the child says, but don't try to get details if they don't give them.
Right. It's just hard from a standby person. You want to get as much information as you can, and sometimes they're just questions that are out there. We'll ask you, did the child specify A, B, and C, and try to get specifics from you. Sometimes it's best that maybe a school counselor talks to the child, gets the child to open up with just generic open-ended questions. If you see a child and they walk in on Monday morning and they've got a black eye, it'd be like, oh, what happened to you? And then they just start, giving you a whole list of things that happened. That's very helpful. If there's situations where they lower the head and they, drop eye contact and say nothing and walk away, that raises a lot of red flags. So there's definitely concern to always call. So if there's ever suspicion, by all means, just call us and we'll try to ask and get a report accepted as much as we can.
This is where I'll put a plug in for the youth mental health first aid certification that we're doing through the Department of Ed and providing for counselors and all educators. It really gives you kind of an opportunity to practice and learn how to talk to a child and get that information without interrogating them or without really digging for it. It's just basically how to have that conversation with a child who is expressing a crisis or challenge situation and just in a conversation setting rather than, interrogating. What type of language should be used to take a case where a student has expressed suicidal ideation and the parent refuses to have the child assessed. I had a situation where I put in a report and the parent would not get the child assessed. It wound up with a picture of the child, you know, portraying an incident. So
Right. So in we're looking at a medical neglect allegation right there, unless it's the parent or guardian who is causing the mental distress to the child. But that is something that we need to address. If the child is having these ideations and the parents are just not getting assessed, not looking at it, then that would be a medical neglect type of a situation. So we definitely would want to know if the child has the means to commit the act, if they're suicidal, if they've made attempts, if they're self-harming. Those are immediate types of situations. So as an operator, we would accept the report for investigation, and most likely we would call the county office, let them know we have the situation at this place, and this is where the child is, and there's real concern for this child doing something harmful to herself. And if it's after hours, we would contact local law enforcement, letting them know that we've got information about a suicidal child.
several people are saying they need to jump off because, you know, we're right here at 12:30. I'm going to put in a chat. I'm going to put in the chat the link to an evaluation. If y'all don't mind to fill that out for me, it does help drive the trainings that we're doing. But I know, Mr. Mack, we're on your time frame now. If you want to keep answering questions, and people, if y'all want to stay on or jump off, it's totally what you want to do. But I think there's some really good conversations going on. And we do have the whole list of Google Doc questions, and Dan will fill that out, and that'll be posted as well. So I'm willing to keep feeding you questions as long as you're able to keep answering them.
Yeah, I'm fine as long as you've got questions.
Okay. So I think this does take us to the Google Doc. I know you've got a printout of it. Do you want to just kind of start there and hit some of those questions?
Sure. Does everybody have the same Google Doc so I don't have to repeat the questions, or do you want me to go and just
You'll need to repeat them because nobody has the Google Doc.
Okay. I'll just run these down in order as they are on the Google Doc. If a family has an open DCFS case, should we, school counselors, contact the caseworker with updates on the family? I understand that hotline calls need to be made for documentation if it meets the criteria for a hotline call. And I am thinking of things like tardiness, excessive absences, recurring discipline issues in which the parent has also been contacted. So if you're looking at a situation and you've made this one, looks to reference educational neglect, and it's a continuing issue, then that would be something you would notify the caseworker for. You could call us with a new report. It may only have been a week or 10 days and it's still a recurring problem. But like I mentioned earlier, they have 45 days to come to the conclusion of their investigation. So if it's the same thing that's going on and repeated, and it's a neglectful issue like this, then I would go ahead and say give it to the caseworker. If it's neglectful issues that may be causing harm or distress to the child, maybe there's an environmental concern, they're having hygiene issues, there is an issue with rashes or things where they have physical sores, that may be something a little bit different that you'd want to make a report to. But definitely keep the caseworker involved in the loop. The next question asks, are those who are reported able to read the report that a mandated reporter turns in? And as Genesis referenced earlier, no, they are not. They're not given a copy of the report. They're simply told there's been an allegation made to the child abuse hotline of, and say what the allegation type is. Too many times, like Genesis mentioned, they can figure out who may have made the report. As a staff, operators are trained specifically to de-identify our narratives. We will tell the narrative from a third person standpoint. We will start out the report by saying the alleged victim is so-and-so, and we'll name them and provide their age. They live in the home with so-and-so, and the alleged offender is X. It's reported, the AV disclosed. We don't say the AV disclosed their school counselor today at ABC Elementary School in Johnson County and go on from there. So we're going to make it as generic as in general as possible to say the AV disclosed their dad's he received the black eye from a spanking from his stepdad, and do whatever and go from there. So no, we will definitely not give the information or the report to the reported family or the offender. What are the guidelines for accepting a claim or a report? Those are laid out in the Child Maltreatment Act, the Arkansas Juvenile Codes or Criminal Code, 12-18-101. And I believe the final statute is 12-18-1100 or something in there. 12-18-103 actually gives you the definitions of what is and what is not maltreatment. So that might be a section that you look at and read if you have questions or concerns about what is acceptable for a claim. Another question, what do you do after the claim has been made and no changes have been made? As mentioned earlier, give the 45-day time frame its chance to run the course. Sometimes there isn't enough information to substantiate or find a report true. If you have the victim saying one thing, the offender saying the opposite, and no one to really corroborate either side of the story, then you end up with a stalemate and the investigation has to be unsubstantiated due to lack of preponderance of evidence. And that's what we're looking for, or the investigators are looking for. So if you have a new incident of maltreatment, by all means, make a new report to the hotline. And sometimes those new reports are more severe than the first report, and you can get something changed and corrected that way. So if the maltreatment continues, by all means, feel free to make a new report to the hotline. Our reportment's typically made with families before a visit. This has happened this year, and it did not help the situation. From general practices, no. There should not be any announced visits. They should all be unannounced so that it prevents the family from making any kind of preparations. If you know of that happening and going on, again, I would definitely contact your Department of Children and Family Services supervisor and let them know the situation and what your concerns are. Are there different timeframes for investigating according to the level of abuse and neglect reported, or are they all treated the same? As I mentioned earlier, we have priority 1 allegations and priority 2 allegations. Priority 1 allegations usually encompass all of the sexual abuse allegations to a child and severe physical abuse, severe injuries to a child when you're dealing with head trauma, subdural hematomas, skull fractures, broken bones, burns and scalding to a child. Typically injuries that would require immediate medical attention, put the child's life at risk. Those are usually situations that we will assign a priority 1 allegation to. And then, as I mentioned before, lesser neglect type of allegations that don't see the child being in immediate danger, those would be assigned more or less a priority 2 allegation. Another question, if a student in foster care discloses past abuse, do we report it because it was probably already part of their DCFS case? As a general rule, I'd say sure, you need to report it. It's not uncommon for a foster child to make repeated disclosure, especially if they're dealing with somebody new in their life. But in the same right, we don't know what all the child has disclosed. So it's not uncommon for us to come across an allegation that was never previously investigated. And again, at the very least, all you're doing is fulfilling your mandated reporter obligation, and we'll build a case file for the child. What do we do if we think they are being trafficked, and do we need to report to the national hotline? Always call the hotline if you feel there is a situation of trafficking. That topic sadly has really come to the forefront within the last 3 to 4 years or so. Those are priority 1 allegation types. So you have quite a few agencies that get involved. The state police child abuse hotline is involved. You have state police criminal investigation gets involved. The FBI can be involved. U.S. Marshal Service can be involved. So you have a lot of law enforcement agencies who are working these kind of cases. So by all means, if you feel that a child is being trafficked, you will be asked specific questions to determine the trafficking issue. But we will definitely go ahead and make that call to us. If you want to make a report to the national hotline, that certainly is your choice as well.
One question, does making the report to the national hotline satisfy our responsibility as a mandated reporter, or do we have to call ASP for that piece?
Because the Arkansas laws specify we call the child abuse hotline, I would make the report to the child abuse hotline. More often than not, if you make a report to the national hotline, it will get to us. I don't know the time constraints of how long it does. We get reports from Europe all the time that are made disclosures about stuff over there. So we know there's national hotlines out there. We just don't know how quickly the information will get to us. So the sooner we get it, the better it will be for all of us. How do we get documentation of sexting or child pornography, since getting it from the kids would be possessing it? This is a huge, huge problem. A lot of the times with the sexting issues, it's a lot of it is voluntary. The victim children are willing participants in the communication and the requests that are being made. If someone makes a request to them for pictures or for videos, those are it's scary. The requester could be a child, the requester could be an adult. And oftentimes the victim is a willing participant in those situations. Law enforcement certainly can be involved with that as far as obtaining that information. You're right, from getting that information, I definitely would want to have that information in my possession, but we have received several reports from SROs who will get the cell phone from the child, and then they can do a cell phone dump and get all that information, all the text and everything, the pictures or whatever. Just to be aware, if you have children who are being exploited, but they don't know who the offender is, he or she is just some email address or requester on a social media forum, a lot of those reports will go to local law enforcement. The state police has an ICAC division, an Internet Crimes Against Children division, that investigates those type of cyber crimes. If the victim knows their party, say the victim is in a relationship with a school official, maybe there's a teacher and you have an older child. If communication is that way, then that is something that we could be involved with, because now you have face-to-face contact with the victim to their offender. But even if it's a voluntary sexting and swapping of pictures and videos, sharing of that information is against the law. So that's something we try to always tell folks, just beware that is something that is a criminal offense if they have it or they know of it.
So this is a personal question. If you know a child has been sexting, if they tell you they've got those photos, I know we don't say, well, send them to me. We don't do that. But you said something about taking their phone. Us having their phone with them on it, is that the same thing as possessing it?
No, from a legal standpoint, that's where you get law enforcement involved, get your SRO involved. They'll know their parameters of what they can and can't do as far as trying to obtain the phone. Sometimes that information, because you have that legal authority requesting that phone, the victim may be willing to give the phone to the officer as opposed to giving the phone to a teacher or a counselor. So whenever there's an information that we get of child pornography or sexting or definitely explicit child images, that becomes a legal issue right away. So if we can't get it, you haven't observed the information, we would take that. If we didn't have enough to accept a report for investigation, we would forward it to local law enforcement and say, hey, we have a possibility of this situation going on. So from a criminal standpoint, they would jump in. And then once they found the information from the criminal report, they would make a report to the hotline for us. Can administrators require teachers to tell them before we call the hotline? I would say that practice would not be recommended, just because, again, you run into that aspect of it where the teacher or the subordinate, if you will, is having to get permission from their boss, their superior. So that runs into really against what they're saying, is that everybody can make them as a mandated reporter, you can make a report. So I would definitely stay away from that. But again, if policies are in place for schools, that we don't get into the aspect of the policies. We know that there's schools that still spank children or paddle children. And we recommend that not be done, because if as an administrator or as a teacher, if you paddle a child and leave an injury on that child, you are subject to putting yourself on the registry and losing your profession. So that's just one of those situations of practicing, I would say, No, it's not recommended as far as the administrators require that for the teachers, but that's up to the school. If we make a call to the hotline and do not tell our administrators, can they discipline us for following the mandated reporter law? Again, that's an internal policy, not in the law. As a mandated reporter, you are legally required to make a report to the hotline. So those types of policies really come down to each individual agency, maybe even higher up than as far as, a statewide agency, as far as what practices are done and what not to be done. So from our standpoint, we would definitely say that you should make a report as a mandated reporter, but we can't answer the part as far as being disciplined by an administrator. If a teacher calls and reports what they have been told, then later gets more information about the same child or the same family, should we make another report? If you have a new allegation that wasn't addressed in the first report, then I would say yes. If it's similar or same situation, but maybe just a different parameter, I would say probably just fax it in, unless you know that the child's health or safety might be an immediate risk. Is there a time requirement from when we are told to when we have to report? What if we weren't sure the first time we heard something, but then learned more or saw more signs? As I mentioned earlier, the Child Maltreatment Act says you need to make a report immediately, and immediately would be within 48 hours. Sometimes you may not get enough information to have a report accepted, but I would rather you make the report, get the information documented, but then as more information comes in, then you can always call us back and make a new report, say, okay, we didn't know this answer before, but I was able to confirm that, yes, this did happen, and we can probably take it on the second go around. Do we report domestic abuse of parents, even if it isn't the child being abused? If so, what if they tell us their mom and dad fight and dad beats up mom? I would definitely make a report to the hotline. You never know how these situations can turn bad or go south in just really just a blink of an eye. Children may get maybe hearing this on a regular basis, and they may just snap and decide to go in and defend their mom, and then they become the subject of the abuse themselves. So at the very least, you make a report to us. If the child wasn't harmed, we could always forward the report to law enforcement, let them know of the domestic situation that's dangerous, and that they can go ahead and address it, and maybe do a welfare check on the family or on the mom to make sure mom is okay, and see if there's any kind of criminal report that needs to be made to the hotline. Is sexting and abuse to report under child maltreatment? Yes, always make a report on the sexting issue. Depending on who the offender is to the victim child, what their relationship is with one another, that would be what determine whether or not it's a report we can accept for investigation. As I mentioned earlier, if there's no face-to-face contact between the victim and the offender, then more often than not, we're unable to accept those reports for investigation, particularly if you're talking about out-of-state type of situations, or it's on a social media platform. But if the victim and the offender know one another, they live in the same town, or are familiar with each other socially, then oftentimes we can go ahead and accept those for investigation, depending on what's said. What we're looking for as far as verbal requests, a predator telling somebody or telling a child what they want to do to the child in a sexual manner isn't the same thing as requesting to act out, if you will, the request. So requesting to touch the child in a sexual manner, or requesting the child to touch the offender in a sexual manner, definitely falls into realms of maltreatment. If a child is underage and the offender is expressing their desire of what they would like to do when the child turns of age, becomes an issue more for law enforcement than it does for child maltreatment.
A relative question that's in the chat. I've heard recently that we could face felony charges if we know about sexting and don't report it. Is that true? And is that information going to be given out publicly? A colleague heard it in a voluntary virtual training.
I don't know about the part is, again, if it's leading towards maltreatment issues and stuff that is criminal and it's against the law, I would probably get with your SRO or your local legal advocate or maybe even law enforcement. Hey, where are we when it comes to being knowledgeable of sexting? Is it sexting between two 16-year-olds and they're just sexting each other back and forth and their boyfriend and girlfriend? Or are you talking about somebody who is a caregiver to a child or so it really depends sometimes on the relationship between the two parties. But I would definitely get a legal opinion from either your legal team or maybe someone in law enforcement to explain that out for you.
I'll follow up. That was one of the trainings that we had with one of our human trafficking presenters. And so there is a statute, and I was trying to pull it up. I don't have the number right in front of me. There is part of the annotated code that talks about knowing that pictures exist and not doing anything about it and not reporting. And so then as I was asking our legal team here at ADE, their question was, how do you define reporting? How do you define pornography? And
Right.
how do you define allowing it? Because that's the phrase that's used in there.
Sure.
They tended to feel like it might be more of a tech issue with the school, because if it's on a school issued Chromebook or something like that, then it opens up other realms. So
Right.
good question, Madison. There's stuff there to find out. But
And there is, and Suzanne and I talked about this the other day. Cyber crimes are really vastly approaching, and the laws have to catch up to the cyber crimes. So you have cyber texting without imagery, but then you have cyber texting with imagery. So now you've got the imagery. Is the imagery explicit of the child? So then we look into a child pornography type of an issue. So there's several different types of nuances, and then so you're dealing more of a criminal aspect than you are a child maltreatment aspect of it. So we're definitely evolving on those kind of situations. And we look to the Child Maltreatment Act to see when they start acknowledging cyber crimes in regards to child maltreatment issues. Right now, it's more of a criminal issue. So we refer most of our cyber crimes to law enforcement. When should we use the ASP fax form to report? Please give an example of a non-emergency. I think we've already covered that one. Some school staff has reported that parents and family have been given their name as reported to the hotline. Are they allowed to do so? No. And again, we talked about it's a poker game. They may say, hey, I know that Suzanne's the one that called us in because she's had it out for me before and so on and so forth. And she's the only one that knew about this situation. But they are not going to be told legally that Suzanne made this report to the hotline. So they should not get that information whatsoever. Are there certain keywords we should use if they apply? For example, in the facts about a student with enrolled in school, dealing more so with education neglect. So I think that one would be suited for our discussion on May 18th, Suzanne, if that's all right with you. And then the final question I have on my page is there a law that charges adults for not reporting child pornography? Is it because we are mandated reporters, or is it that does that apply to all adults? And because child pornography is a federal crime, I would think anyone knowledgeable of it should make the report. I don't know criminally if someone chooses not to make a report, if they are criminally liable for anything. So that would definitely be something, again, to the legal teams to see, has that law been passed where anyone knowledgeable of child pornography needs to make a report? I'm not aware of it if there is. Those are all the questions I had in the Google Docs.
there's one more that came in, and well, that'll round us out to an even extra 30 minutes. I appreciate your time. And for those of y'all that hung in, I'll adjust your certificate up to the hour and a half. But this one, as mandated reporter, do you report information that you have not witnessed yourself, information that you have only been told about?
All the time. I'm a mandated reporter, so I had a situation where once people know who you work for, what you do, it's surprising how many people will call you just to run a scenario by you. So I've been told numerous situations in cases where I know of children being victimized and was told by their parent or by someone who became aware of the information. So I made the report. Once I become aware of it, I now become a mandated reporter. Even if the parent or guardian of the child said they were going to call the hotline, I would still make a report myself because I'm now aware of the information. So always go ahead and call it in. As long as you know it's maltreatment, again, you're reporting what you believe to be true. There's a statute in the Child Maltreatment Act that really says you're exempt from any criminal or civil liability if you're reporting something that you believe to be true, even if it's false. If you find out days later the child recanted and just made it up because they were mad at mom and dad, you still reported something that you felt and you believed was true. So as long as you're not knowingly making a false report, you're okay. You're in the clear.
This has been awesome. Everyone's accolades in the chat for the information and what you've shared. So we appreciate you greatly. I've popped a little bit of information in the chat. Again, if you got the link from anyone else than me or ESC Works, send me an email to make sure you get your certificate. I've also put in a link to our evaluation form. We'd love to hear the feedback. And then this will be recorded and it will be posted on the DESE Safe Schools webpage, along with the chat and the questions and all of this stuff. We'll gather up all this good information. And I will pop in the link to that webpage in the chat. And thank you all for being here and for hanging out and for this wonderful conversation. Have a great weekend. Be safe. Have a great rest of the year. We'll see you at the next training.
Thanks, everyone. I appreciate it.
Dan, I'll get us set up for the 18th and we'll do it again. This was great.
Sounds good. I will. I found that slide. It was just actually a technological issue. Apparently it's got some kind of a delay on it. So I will email you the presentation that I just did so that you'll have it. You can post it on the website.
Okay, perfect. Did you type out the questions in the Google Doc or did you?
No, I just printed it, but I can go into the Google Doc and go in and type those answers.
If you don't mind to, I will add the questions from the chat. I'll go back and listen to the recording and capture your answers because there was some really good dialogue from that as well. So if you don't mind to take care of that, I'll combine the two to get our Q&A answer document going.
I will do so.
All right. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, Suzanne. You do the same. Take care.